The call came at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, while Verity Marsh was elbow-deep in bread dough and trying not to think about the fact that she'd forgotten to pay the electric bill again. Her daughter was asleep upstairs. The bakery was closed. The only light in the kitchen came from the hood vent above the oven, and in that particular half-dark, with flour on her forearms and Rosemary Clooney playing low on the radio, she'd almost convinced herself that this was enough. This small life, this quiet. Then the phone rang. She didn't recognize the number, Miami area code, which meant nothing except that she almost didn't answer. She almost let it go to voicemail and went back to her dough and her radio and her careful, constructed piece. Almost Mrs. Marsh. The voice on the other end was male, precise, the kind of voice that belonged to lawyers or men who never had to raise it to be heard. "My name is Holt. I represent Dominic Reyes." She set down the dough. "I think there's been a mistake," she said. "I'm afraid there hasn't." Dominic Reyes. She hadn't heard that name in 6 years and had spent most of those years working very hard to keep it that way. He was the reason she'd left Miami, the reason she'd moved to a small town in coastal Georgia with a 4-month-old and a lease on a failing bakery and absolutely no plan beyond. Get out, stay out, don't look back. It had worked. For 6 years it had worked. "Whatever he wants," Verity said carefully. "The answer is no. He's dying, Ms. Marsh." A pause, deliberate, giving the words room to land. Stage 4. He has perhaps 6 weeks. He's asking to see his daughter. The dough sat on the counter getting warm, and she stood in the half-dark of her kitchen with flour on her arms and thought, here it is, the thing I knew would come eventually. She'd always known. You didn't walk away from a man like Dominic Reyes without understanding that walking away was temporary, that men like him had long memories and longer reaches, that someday, one way or another, the past would find a forwarding address. His daughter, Verity said, doesn't know he exists. That's why he's asking. She hung up, stood at the counter for a long time. Then she went upstairs and stood in the doorway of her daughter's room and watched Lily sleep. Lily, 6 years old, gap-toothed, ferocious, currently tangled in sheets printed with cartoon dogs. She'd kicked her blanket off again. She always kicked her blanket off. Verity crossed the room and pulled it back up over small shoulders that were somehow still soft, despite the fact that Lily Marsh approached the world like a person with a personal vendetta against all forms of opposition. She got that from her father. Verity had spent 6 years pretending that wasn't true. She didn't sleep that night. She lay in her bed and listened to the ceiling and had the same argument with herself that she'd been having in her head since the moment she hung up the phone. By 3 in the morning, she'd talked herself into going. By 4, she'd talked herself out of it. By 5, she was downstairs in the bakery, starting the morning prep, because at least bread had rules. At least bread was honest about what it needed. By the time Lily came downstairs in her school clothes, shoes on the wrong feet, hair uncombed, entirely certain about everything, Verity had made her decision. "Mama, can we get a dog?" "No." "Mama, can we get a fish?" "We'll talk about it." Lily narrowed her eyes, recognizing the dodge. She was alarmingly good at recognizing dodges. You always say that about things you're going to say no to. I say it about things that require more thought. That's just a nicer way to say no. Verity looked at her daughter, this small, exasperating, wonderful person she'd built a life around, and thought, she deserves to know where she comes from. And then, immediately after, she deserves to be protected from exactly that. Both things true. No clean answer between them. "Finish your cereal," Verity said. "You're going to miss the bus." She called Holt back that afternoon, standing behind the counter after the last customer had gone and the closed sign was turned in the window. "I need conditions," she said without preamble. "Mr. Reyes anticipated that. Lily doesn't go alone with him. Not once. I'm present for every conversation. She doesn't know who he is until I decide she's ready to know. And if at any point I decide this is doing more harm than good, we leave. No argument, no persuasion, no legal maneuver," agreed. She'd expected pushback. The fact that she didn't get it made her more nervous, not less. Men like Dominic Reyes didn't agree to conditions. They offered them. "What does he want from this?" she asked, a pause. "I believe he wants to see her before he dies, Miss Marsh." "I think it may be as simple as that." "Nothing about him is simple." "No," Holt said. and for the first time something almost human moved through his precise voice. I don't suppose it is. She told Lily they were going to visit Miami for a long weekend. A friend of Mama's was sick and needed a visit. Lily accepted this the way she accepted most things, with 100 follow-up questions, and then complete focus on what she was going to pack. Can I bring Sergeant? Sergeant was a stuffed rabbit of indeterminate original color, now mostly gray from years of love and occasional hostile laundering. Yes! Can I bring my rocks? Lily collected rocks. Not special rocks, not gemstones, just rocks she found on the ground that she decided had good energy. She had 47 of them. Pick 5, 10, 7, done. Lily pumped her fist. She believed in the art of the counteroffer. Verity had no idea where she'd learned that. She lied to herself about that too. The Reyes estate sat back from the water behind gates that Verity remembered, and a garden that had gotten wilder in 6 years, bougainvillea spilling over the walls in riotous pink, jacaranda dropping purple onto stone paths. It looked less maintained than she remembered, less curated. Like whoever had been keeping it perfect had stopped trying. There were fewer cars in the drive, fewer men at the perimeter. She noticed that in the way she'd learned to notice things, not because she'd ever been in danger at this house, but because she'd spent 2 years being adjacent to danger and your eyes learned to count exits without being asked to. Holt met them at the door. 50s, silver-haired, careful in a way that suggested he'd been careful for a very long time. Ms. Marsh. He looked at Lily with an expression he controlled very well, but not quite perfectly. Something moved behind his eyes. And this must be Lily, Verity said. Just Lily. He nodded and led them inside. The house smelled the same. That was the thing about certain places. The smell of them was fossilized in your memory, and walking back into it was like pressing a bruise. Citrus and wood polish, and something green, something that came from all that ocean air pressing against the windows. Lily had no such memories. She walked in looking at everything with the frank assessment of a child who has not yet learned to pretend she isn't staring. This house is very big, she announced. It is, Holt agreed. Are there secret passages? Lily, I'll look into that, Holt said, and for a moment his careful face almost broke into something warm. Dominic was in the sunroom. Verity knew that before Holt told her, because it was where he'd always done his thinking. That room full of light, with its view of the bay and the old telescope he'd had since childhood and never looked through, kept more as an artifact than an instrument. He was smaller than she remembered. That was the first thing. 6 years and illness had taken something from the specific quality of space he used to occupy. She remembered a man whose presence was physical, who walked into rooms in a way that rearranged them. This man was still recognizably Dominic Reyes, still had those same dark eyes, that same held-back stillness. But the size of him had contracted, like a fire that's been banked. He looked at Lily, and Lily, curious, unimpressed by almost everything, currently carrying Sergeant under one arm and her 7 selected rocks in her jacket pocket, looked back at him. "Hello," Lily said. "Hello." His voice was quieter than it used to be, too. Or maybe she was just noticing things she hadn't before, when she'd been busy being in love with him and hadn't been paying proper attention. "Are you the sick person, Lily?" Verity started. "Yes," Dominic said. "I am." Lily considered this. "My friend Owen's grandpa was sick. He died." "I know," Dominic said. "That's likely what will happen to me." Lily nodded, processing this with the pragmatic solemnity of a child who has been told the truth about things and therefore trusts the truth. "Is that scary?" Something shifted in his face. Something that Verity had spent 2 years trying to find, looking for it in the way he spoke and the way he moved and the way he held himself apart from everything including her. That thing that lived underneath the control and the silence and the careful management of his own emotions. "Yes," he said simply. "It is." Lily thought about it. Then she reached into her jacket pocket and produced a small, smooth, gray stone. "You can have this one," she said. "It has good energy." He took it, held it in his palm, and looked at it for a moment like she'd handed him something he didn't have a category for. Verity sat down before her legs made the decision for her. That evening, after Lily had been put to bed in a guest room that Holt had apparently stocked with a small stuffed dog and a chapter book about horses. both of which Lily accepted with the regal satisfaction of someone whose preferences had been correctly anticipated. Verity sat across from Dominic in that same sunroom, and they were alone for the first time in 6 years. The bay outside had gone dark. The city glittered across the water like it always had, like it always would, indifferent to the specific arrangements and failures of the people looking at it. "You look well," he said. "Don't do that." He nodded, acknowledging the redirect. "How is the bakery? You know how the bakery is." A pause. Yes. She'd assumed he'd kept track of her. She'd told herself it didn't matter, that it was just the thing men like him did, cataloging what they considered theirs even after they'd pushed it away. It was different to hear him confirm it. "Why didn't you ever reach out?" she asked. And then, before he could answer, "No, I know why. I'm asking if you understand that not reaching out was a choice. That Lily growing up without a father was a choice you made. It was, and I believed it was the right choice." He looked at the stone Lily had given him, sitting on the table beside his water glass. "I had people trying to destroy me, Verity. Not metaphorically. I had men who had decided that the most effective way to end my operation was to end the people connected to me. I believed, that distance was the only protection I could offer her. You could have offered her a father, not without offering her a target." She wanted to argue with that. She'd spent 6 years being angry at him in the specific, exhausting way you could only be angry at someone you'd once loved. Not hot, not explosive, just this persistent, low-grade fury that had become so familiar it was practically a personality trait. But sitting here across from him, with his hands thinner than she remembered and his voice quieter, she couldn't locate the clean moral ground she'd been standing on in her head. "She's remarkable," he said. "I know. She has your don't." Verity looked at him. "She has her own things. She's her own person. She's not a sum of parts from you and me. She's Lily." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You're right. I'm sorry." That surprised her more than it should have. She couldn't remember him apologizing for anything when they were together. Not because he'd been cruel. He hadn't been cruel, exactly, but because apology required acknowledging fallibility, and Dominic Reyes had been constitutionally incapable of that. "What do you want from this?" she asked. "Holt said you wanted to see her. You've seen her. What's the rest of it?" "I want her to know I exist." He met her eyes. "Not who I am, not what I've done. Just, I want her to know there was a person who chose her, even if I went about it wrong. Even if I'm too late. You are too late. I know. She's going to ask questions. I know that too." Verity looked out at the bay. A boat moved across it, lights on, unhurried. She thought about the man she'd been in love with at 28, who she'd believed was just a businessman, then gradually understood was something else, and had then spent 6 months telling herself it didn't matter, and another 2 months knowing it did. She thought about the night she'd finally asked him directly, and he'd told her the truth, all of it, with the flat precision of someone reading from a document. And she'd sat there across from him in this same room listening and understanding that the man she loved and the man sitting in front of her were not quite the same person. She thought about the morning she'd told him she was pregnant, the way his face had done something complicated and then settled back into stillness, the way he'd said, "I think you should go." Verity, not cruelly, not coldly, but with the particular gentleness of a person doing what they've calculated is necessary. She'd hated him for it. She still did, in that low-grade, persistent way. But sitting here now with his hands thin and his eyes tired and Lily's gray stone on the table between them, she couldn't quite maintain the full force of it. 3 days, she said finally. "We're here for 3 days. You can spend time with her. We tell her you're a friend of mine who I lost touch with. We tell her you're ill. We answer her questions honestly, but within limits, I decide. At the end of 3 days, we go home. And then," she paused, "and then we'll figure out what comes after." He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved through his face that she hadn't seen there before. Not emotion, exactly, or not just emotion. More like relief at something he'd stopped believing was possible. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me. I'm not doing this for you. I know." He looked at the stone again. "I know exactly who you're doing this for." The 3 days were strange. Lily took to him the way she took to most things that interested her, completely, chaotically, without reservation. By the second morning, she decided he needed to see her rock collection and had arranged all 7 stones on the table next to his water glass with the careful seriousness of a museum curator. She'd explained the properties of each one. He'd listened with his full attention, which was, Verity had to admit, one of the things she'd once loved about him. That quality of making you feel like the only thing in the room that mattered. She'd forgotten he was capable of directing it at something other than a problem that needed solving. "This one," Lily said, holding up a small reddish stone, "is for courage. I found it outside my school the day I started first grade, and I was scared, and then I found it, and I wasn't as scared anymore." "Did the stone make you brave?" he asked, not condescending, genuinely asking. Lily considered this with appropriate philosophical weight. "No," she said finally. "I think I was always going to be brave, but the stone reminded me." He looked at Verity over Lily's head. She looked away. That night, after Lily was asleep, Verity sat on the edge of the terrace with a glass of water she wasn't drinking and tried to organize her feelings into something manageable. She wasn't sure she succeeded. The problem with feelings was they didn't particularly care about being organized. She's going to want to know. Dominic had come out quietly, moving the way he always moved, like he'd learned to take up as little space as possible despite being the most significant presence in any room. He stood at the railing, looking at the water. "Eventually. Who I really am. Eventually," Verity agreed. "What will you tell her?" She thought about it honestly. About the story she'd tell and the things she'd omit and the impossible calculus of how much truth a child needed at what age. "I'll tell her you were complicated, that you made choices I didn't agree with, that you loved her in the way you were capable of, which wasn't the way either of us would have wanted, but was real." "Is that true?" She looked at him. "Did you love her?" "I never met her." His voice was quiet. "But I thought about her. I kept track of her. I knew when she lost her first tooth. I knew about the rock collection. I knew about Sergeant the Rabbit." He paused. "I don't know if that's love or if it's just watching from a distance and calling it something. Maybe it's the beginning of something that didn't get to grow properly." He looked at her. "Is that forgiveness?" "No." She meant it. "It's just accurate. You don't get forgiveness in 3 days. Maybe not ever, but you get accuracy." He nodded. "When she's older," he said carefully, "if she wants to know more about me, about who I was and what I built and what I destroyed, will you let her make that choice?" "She'll make all her own choices eventually. That's the thing about her." Verity felt something loosen slightly in her chest. She's not going to let anyone else make them for her. She already doesn't. A small sound that might have been a laugh. She gets that from you. She gets it from herself. But she didn't argue against the observation the way she had before. The last morning, Lily sat with him at the breakfast table while Verity packed. She could hear them through the open window, Lily explaining something at length. It sounded like the plot of a book she was reading, which she explained the way she explained everything, with complete commitment and absolutely no awareness that the listener might need context she was skipping. He asked questions. Good ones. The kind that showed he'd been paying attention. When Verity came down with the bags, Lily was leaning against his arm with the casual confidence of a child who had decided she trusted someone. It hurt more than she'd expected. It also, unexpectedly, didn't only hurt. "Are you going to get better?" Lily asked him, direct as always. "I don't think so," he said. She thought about this. "Are you scared?" "Less than I was," he said. He was looking at Lily. Then he looked up and caught Verity's eyes across the room. "Less than I was." Lily nodded, processing this. Then she reached into her jacket pocket. She'd put the rocks back in, protocol, and produced the reddish courage stone. She set it on the table in front of him. "You should keep this one," she said. "You need it more than me." He looked at it for a long time. Then he picked it up and closed his hand around it. "Thank you, Lily. You're welcome." She slid off the chair. "Mama, can we stop for breakfast tacos on the way to the airport?" "Yes," Verity said, because her voice was doing something unreliable, and yes was the only word she trusted at the moment. In the car, Lily fell asleep before they reached the highway. Sergeant tucked under one arm the seat belt, making a line across her small, sleeping face. Verity drove and thought about the version of herself at 28 who had fallen in love with a man because he was still and brilliant and looked at her like she was a problem worth solving. She thought about the choices that had cascaded from that one original mistake, or decision, or whatever it was. She'd never been able to settle on the right word. Mistake implied she regretted Lily, which she didn't. Not for a single day of her life. But she thought about the woman she'd become by leaving. Stronger, certainly, more self-sufficient than she'd ever imagined she could be. She'd built something real, the bakery, the life in Georgia, the small specific world she and Lily had constructed together out of flour and morning light and 47 rocks and a rabbit named Sargent. She'd built it herself. That mattered. It would keep mattering. But she thought about the stone, the reddish courage stone that Lily had given away without hesitation because she'd seen someone who needed it more. 6 years old, and already she understood something about courage, that it wasn't for keeping, that it only worked when you handed it forward. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. She didn't look at it until a red light. A message from a number she didn't have saved, but recognized. She's extraordinary. Thank you for bringing her. Whatever I did or didn't do, she is the best thing. I know you know that. I just wanted to say it to someone. She sat at the red light for a long moment. Behind her, a car waited patiently. Lily breathed soft and even in the back seat. She typed back, "She knows she's loved. I made sure of that." She put the phone down and drove. 2 months later, on a Thursday morning that smelled like cinnamon and rain, Lily came downstairs with her shoes on the correct feet for once, and a look on her face that meant she'd been thinking about something. Mama. Verity was measuring butter. The man in Miami, Dominic. Lily said his name carefully, like she'd been holding it somewhere and was testing the weight of it. Did he die? Verity set down the butter. She turned around and looked at her daughter, this small, ferocious person who understood more than she was given credit for and demanded more truth than most adults wanted to offer. Yes, she said. Last week. Lily nodded slowly. I thought so. I felt something. What did you feel? Lily considered it seriously, the way she considered all things. Like when you lose something and you're sad, but also, it was already lost before. You know? Verity crouched down to her daughter's level. Yeah, she said, I know exactly what you mean. Was he important to you? A long time ago? Yes. But you were also angry at him. Verity didn't ask how she knew. Lily always knew. Yes. Both things were true. Lily thought about this with the full gravity it deserved. Then, can I have a memorial for him? Like, put one of my rocks somewhere nice? Verity felt something shift in her chest. Something that had been held tight for 6 years, maybe longer, finally releasing just slightly, like a window opened into air that had been still too long. Yes, she said. I think that's a perfect idea. They went to the beach that afternoon, the two of them, and Lily chose a pale white stone from her collection. Not one from Miami, a new one, found here, belonging to here, and placed it at the edge of the water with the solemn care of someone who believed that small things could carry significant weight. Verity stood beside her and watched the water come in. She'd spent 6 years building walls between herself and the past had come anyway, as it always does, and she'd walked through it and come out the other side still standing, still herself, with her daughter beside her and flour perpetually on her forearms and bread to bake in the morning. That was enough. It was more than enough. It was the specific, unglamorous, irreplaceable life she'd made for herself, and she had chosen it, and she would keep choosing it. Okay, Lily said, satisfied, brushing sand from good energy now. Yeah, Verity said. I think he does. They walked back up the beach together, Lily's hand finding hers without being asked, the way it always did, certain and warm. The water kept coming in behind them. The stone held its place at the edge of the world, and somewhere between the grief and the anger and the long, complicated task of forgiving someone not for their sake, but for your own, Verity Marsh finally let go of something she'd been carrying for 6 years. Not the anger entirely, not the loss, but the weight of it. The part that had been pulling her backward when she was trying to walk forward. She let it go into the water, with the stone and the tide, and everything else the ocean was patient enough to hold. And she walked home.